Let's meet our panel. First up, he is an author whose latest book is Doing Our Own Thing, The Degradation of Language and Music and Why We Should Like Care. John McWhorter. John, welcome back.
Thank you.
Over here, she was Canada's first female prime minister and is now the Secretary General of the Club of Madrid, which is a group of former heads of state who promote democracy. Kim Campbell, thank you for being back.
Good to be here. Thanks.
And finally, a comedy legend, to say the least, whose latest movie, Kevin Smith's Jersey Girl with Ben Affleck, opens March 26. I don't think there's anybody who made me want to be a comedian more than you did. I have been chasing this man's talented ass for so many years, and I have never caught up. Mr. George Carlin. I just want to briefly start because we were talking about personal responsibility with the secretary there about eating. I'm sure you saw what happened in hockey. I'm not a hockey fan, I'm sorry, but it's your national sport, which is why I don't care about it. But you saw that this hockey, I was just in Vancouver, I love Vancouver. This hockey guy just creamed this guy. This is about personal responsibility. This is his apology. He says, I feel awful for what transpired. How about a pronoun there? I don't play the game that way. Obviously, you do. I'm sorry for what happened. Again, what happened to personal pronouns? I did it. It didn't just happen. The man drove his head into the ice. Okay, got that off my chest. Good. Now, let's talk about what's going on overseas. I thought this was interesting. David Kay, who is our weapons inspector over there, this week said George Bush needs to come clean with the American people and admit it was wrong about the existence of the weapons. That's... Those are harsh words from a former Bush supporter. My question, if George Bush had been honest about this war, would you have supported it more?
I would have. But the problem is that what he really wanted to say, I get the feeling, is that the administration wanted to go and make an example of a particular country to show that an Arab country can be run on a democratic plan. That probably wouldn't have gone over, and so we were told this kind of story, and I think that they held their breath and hoped that some weapons would be found. It didn't work. I would hope at this point that somebody would basically suck in their stomach and maybe admit this. It would be a nice advanced kind of political discourse. I would have gone with it, but I doubt if a lot of other people would have. It was a tough dilemma for them.
Really?
Well, I'm actually amazed that you think you know why he did it, because to me it's still a mystery.
They're very cagey about it.
You know, I mean, if the idea of, you know, getting rid of a terrible tyrant and perhaps providing an opportunity for a country that maybe after careful, serious analysis he decided had the greatest potential to be democratic in the Middle East, you know, at least that's a reason. It would have been a dramatic shift in American foreign policy and international law, but it would have been a reason. But, you know, I'm not sure that that is the reason. And incidentally, you know, you're talking about the hockey player. I mean, if people are not going to take responsibility for the intelligence that led to the war in Iraq, I mean, it's not surprising that a hockey player is still, you know, says, you know, my hand, you know, something happened. I mean, more important events and behavior is out there, and nobody is taking responsibility for it. I mean, you look what happened in Britain, you know, where the two guys that head up the BBC, they resigned when the BBC was criticized. And you could argue that it wasn't all their fault, whatever, but as a matter of institutional responsibility, they say, how do we demonstrate that there's going to be a change, that we take responsibility, we resign?
Well, in terms of the war, you only see this kind of responsibility being taken in the oblique way of people who advise the administration writing in small circulation political journals. But that's certainly not speaking to the public. That's the way you glean what maybe they were thinking.
You know, it's always odd and difficult for me to speak of these things in what I think of as the micro world of this particular Iraq war. This country has been pushing the world around and exploiting the people of the world for a long, long time. And sometimes you have to pay the piper. And that's what happened to us. We now have gotten enough people really angry, and we have sold enough weapons, and we've developed enough technology for them to have them now, and they're being used against us. And whether we went here for this reason or not, this country, the owners of this country do what they want, period. They do what they want. This is what they wanted. This is what they did. And then they dance around, and they'll give you a little of this and a little of that to make it palatable, to keep the generally uninformed population at bay, because that's the way they've kept it. They've kept people uninformed and no critical thinking.
You don't think no good can come out of Iraq? You know, I mean, if George Bush had said, instead of saying Saddam Hussein has a giant death ray that's going to kill us all, if he had said, look, we're not sure he has weapons, and when it comes to the fight against religious-based terrorism, which is what we're fighting, we don't even think Iraq is, they're not on the head of our list, because they weren't. But we need a place to put a democracy. We need a pilot program, okay? And we can't think of anybody better to kick over than Saddam. Would you have gone for that?
The argument is easy enough to understand, but there's an inconsistency in American policy. And if the American government had, I think, was a little more even-handed in Palestine and showed early or even recently that we do care about the fate of both peoples and that we have some solutions, some ideas, some concern, we may be more believable on these other things. But we don't. We take a side and we deny the whole.
Funny you say that.
But don't you think if the rationale is that we have this pilot plan that we want to implement, that there should be a pilot plan or a program? That was the problem. There wasn't one. It was, so let's go ahead and do this. I mean, but there wasn't a plan for implementing.
Well, there could have been an ideological plan.
Wait a
There was an
second,
article in the New York Times Magazine where Ahmed Chalabi said that he went to see George W. Bush, and he spent most of the conversation explaining to President Bush that there were 3 kinds of Muslims in Iraq. This concerned me.
Right, and that's Condi Rice's job. But you mentioned before what's really important, and you mentioned Palestine. I noticed in this new constitution in Iraq, it says Islam is the official religion of the state and is to be considered a source of legislation. I don't know if you can really have a democracy with that. But with all this talk in this country about the anti-Semitism in the Mel Gibson movie, you know, I read all that, well, the Jews had big noses. Well, you know what? The Jews do have big noses. Look at mine, I'm only half Jewish. If you're going to make a movie about, you know, the Jews in that time, place, Arabs have big noses too, Semitic peoples do. Okay, last week on their, but I mean, to be worried about anti-Semitism there, last week on the website of Saudi Arabia, it says very explicitly, no Jews can apply for a visa to Saudi Arabia. Okay, there's your anti-Semitism. That's what we call anti-Semitism.
You know, I have a point. Well, once again, I step back from this opera. I found a position for myself some time ago that gives me some detachment, and that is, when you're born in this world, you're given a ticket to the freak show, and in America, you get a front row seat. It is my opinion that at the base of most of the evil in the world is religion of any kind. Religion of any kind. And that is at the floor. And everything has grown out of that, and the hatred among and between religions is an example. The number of people who have died in the name of God far exceeds any other purpose, such as political or national interest, that you can name, and generally they're mixed anyway. The religion is thrown into the national interest.
Sorry, George, I'm getting a ball game here on my...
Thank God it's live.
It's Tommy Thompson.
Yeah, we're not having a good night with our audio, are we?
Right.
George, do you think we can tell the world that?
Well, I don't think it's necessary.
Because you speak truth.
I don't think we have a job to teach or tell or do or direct or help. Helping is good if there's no strings attached. We've never done that. We've never done that. I frankly do not care about most of these things because if you step back and look at this from long historical perspective, it's a very interesting drama to watch. But I cannot get concerned about something this year, next year, 10 years from now, when 1,000 years from now they'll say, wasn't it interesting? Look what happened. It's out of our hands, and I personally don't care. And I like that position. I like that position because it frees me to be a commentator, if that's what I do some of the time, about these things, to have an emotionally detached distance from them and say, look at what they're doing. Look at what you're doing to yourselves. I mean, the people blame politicians. It's the voters. It's where they say, well, where do these politicians come from? Right. They come from American homes. They come from American churches and schools. It's just the best we have. It's all we can do here. Yeah. So watch it and enjoy it. Sit back. I don't vote personally. You know? Just personal point of view.
Can I say something?
I'm not enjoying it.
Can I say something as a foreigner? Because I think that this concern you raised, can you have democracy with Islam? And people are very worried about this religious fundamentalism. And yet, as a Canadian looking at the United States, I look at it, and I live here, and it's a wonderful country, and I'm deeply grateful for America's hospitality. But the salience of religion in public life here is much greater than it is in other mature democracies.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't think in Canada you could be prime minister if you were ever quoted as saying that you thought God wanted you to run and you thought the jury was still out on evolution.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Good point.
When I was a little girl, everything was closed on Sunday. It was very hard to get a divorce. Homosexual acts were illegal. I mean, all of those things have changed, but they all came from religious views. So I think the real key is, do you have any countervailing force to religious views, and do you have individual liberties and that kind of stuff?
What about the issue of degree? Because there are wonderful things about all religions, but we're not only talking about the fact that Islam is important, but that there are varieties of Islam, and they are powerful and often predominant ones, where, for example, over half of the population, i.e. women, are in a position that I don't think any of us here could countenance. So yes, it's true that religion plays a greater role, particularly in red America, you might say, than we often talk about. But what does religion do in different places? And I think that's something that we need to think about.
Well, I think it's really, I think you raise a really good point. I don't argue with you, and I think, you know, the extent to which Islam will be, or what kind of Islam would be reflected in their laws is interesting. I mean, there are also people who think that women should be in a secondary position in society, and they quote St. Paul, you know, wives be subservient to your husbands. I mean, I'm with George on the religion thing. I think that it gets in the way of morality.
And it plays always on, what it really plays on is fear.
Yeah.
And that's what I think it has in common with politics. They both play on fear. And I think it's interesting that George Bush, for his entire time since 9/11, has been telling us, you know, if we let our lives be run by fear, then they win. But now that the campaign has started, I notice it's all about fear. Have you seen his new campaign ad? There's a Arab Willie Horton in it. A swarthy, Arab-looking guy. And the message is, if you elect John Kerry, you'll be dead because he stinks at fighting terrorism and I'm good at it.
Can I give you my idea of a great John Kerry ad? I'm going to give this for free, and maybe it'll be campaign spending. I don't know. But you see George W. Bush in the Top Gun picture, and you see John Kerry in his uniform, and the Top Gun picture, you say, Mr. Dress Up, John Kerry, the real thing. Wouldn't that be a great ad?
I'll bet you they're going to do something like it. That's great.
It's for free. Anybody can use it if they want.
Funny, we were supposed to have a different kind of campaign this year because of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance bill. And it turns out it's the same old feces-flinging monkey fest as it always has been, because now instead of giving your money to the parties, you give it to MoveOn.org or Citizens United.
It's always going to be that way, of course. All that the left can do is fight fire with fire at this point. Back when it was passed, everybody knew that this was going to happen. It's just going to be a war. That's the way it has to be.
The other thing is that it used to be about the swing voter. This year now, I notice, it's about energizing your base, which sounds dirty, but it really just means getting to the people who are going to vote for you anyway, which is why George Bush has been, George Bush has been going to every, that's the wrong.
Don't get the wrong one first.
No, don't get the wrong one first. George Bush has been going to a lot of white events because George Bush, this is him at NASCAR. George Bush knows that, you know, he's ahead with white men by 20%, and he's trying to increase his base from white men that he knows to white people in general. So, look at this. 2 weeks ago, he was at NASCAR. Then he went to the rodeo this week. And my question is, how white can he go? And that's why there he is with...
Let me see it.
Edgar and Johnny Winter. If you're too young to remember, they are albino rock stars. And if people don't know that, then he can, you know, there's just that. I'm just saying how white. And if that is still not white enough, I'm just saying he could always... So I couldn't let mentioning the rodeo as an animal rights guy pass without saying about the rodeo. As I've said to hunters before, congratulations. once again, you've outsmarted an animal. You must feel awfully good that with interspecies competition, once again, you are able to come out on top.
When I watch for the rodeo, I root for the horses to some guy to be thrown off and stepped on. I want to get a bumper sticker that says "Support rodeo injuries." That's what I think should happen.
Yeah, I don't understand the moral difference between rodeo and cockfighting. I don't.
Or hitting them in the head and eating them later. You know. I mean, God, it's just, you know.
Well, at least in a rodeo, the animal has a chance to fight back.
Really?
I mean, to the people, not to the animal.
Well,
Yeah, well, to step on them, yeah. That's so good to watch. And when they gore someone in the bullfight, I love it. And Pamplona, I watch Pamplona, the running of the bulls, and I say, oh, please trip, fall, and they fall. And I go, oh, this is so great. I just love it.
And
I don't know about all this.
That idiotic Iditarod thing that they have, you know, proving once again, if you hit an animal, it will run. You know, it's very brave once again. All right, I want to welcome to our show. Last week she was fired as a commentator for the local NPR affiliate here in LA because on her regular Sunday morning commentary, she used the F word. Here to discuss her transgression from her cell in Guantanamo Bay, please welcome Sandra Singh Low, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
How are you,
Thank
potty
you.
mouth? You're okay?
I'm good. I'm
What-
out here, you know. I was fired by one of the most powerful radio stations of public radio in the U.S., and NPR also thinks that's okay. So I'm here in the Azores at KAZU, the tiniest public radio station in the tiniest town.
Well, you're in good company because Mr.
You're in
George
Portugal.
Carlin of the 7 Words You Can't Say is here. I have been fired from TV for saying things I would. And
silver
so
lining.
welcome to the club, but don't get a big head about it because Bubba the Love Sponge is also in this
Well,
club now.
And
So-
what's really, sad is that I actually didn't mean to say that particular word.
No,
it
I
was
know.
meant to be bleeped.
I know. It's just so stupid anyway that someone would fire you because you said fuck. Anyway, is this, let me ask you, do you think this is because of Janet Jackson? Is that the nipple that broke the camel's back?
Yes. Yes, as a matter of fact, my station manager has been quoted as saying that my, pre-taped, pre-edited piece, that word coming out was the equivalent of Janet Jackson's performance piece, which is, it's hard to get a breast into a radio speaker. Don't know how it could be done, especially in a pre-taped situation. But I think the hysteria of the FCC has just overtaken everything. So it's kind of this surreal thing where, I'm a 42-year-old minivan driving mother of 2, and CNN headline news has this crawl, commentator Sandra Singh Low fired for obscenity. And then it's BBC headlines as I'm driving my kids to preschool and trying to hide the headline with my body as we go by.
Yeah, this woman who fired you, Ruth Seymour, she's head of
Yes.
NPR, and she said...
She's head of KCRW in Los Angeles.
Okay,
Yeah.
and she said you need to seek help.
Yes. Well, I think with the Janet Jackson thing, there are a lot
You need to seek help because you said the F word. How dumb is this fucking country? I guess.
And I think what's interesting is now George Carlin, the man, the master, is it 7 dirty words or is it 11? I can't remember how many it is. But I think that, Mr. Carlin was making the point that language is very specific and that the F word that I used was in the context of a piece I wrote about Bette Midler's concert. And if you know Ms. Midler, she works a bit blue. She uses some vaudeville rhythms. And my husband's a musician with her, so I was talking about, I can't even say exactly what the line, I can't quite remember what it is. So it was very specific for it to be bleeped. And at that particular moment, but I think what's fascinating is that NPR, even on their official website, NPR is supposedly so specific about language. They have this ombudsman at npr.org where, NPR writers will write in and say, someone said irregardless on the air, and that's not really a word. It's regardless. It's not irregardless. It's regardless.
but you know-
And so they'll go on for pages and pages about this. And then he has a piece on me about the buzz, about the water coolers. Is Ms. Lowe, a salty gal, talked a little blue in the newsroom. And in my day, we didn't do that. I mean, this is
But,
supposedly
Sandra,
a news organization. Yeah.
Irregardless
They're
of that.
slandering me.
You know that someone
It's
is
a
going to
farce.
play the kid card with us. They're going to say, my God, it's not so bad, except children
Oh, the kids.
could be listening. Because,
Protect the kids.
Exactly. Because what are
Yeah,
kids doing Sunday morning? They're listening to NPR.
And frankly, Bill, I'm a full-time mother of two. I was staying home this year to take care of them. And if you're 24 hours a day with children, you will curse in front of them.
Right. All right. Thank you for joining us, Sandra. And I hope you get another job because you're terrific. Isn't it astounding, though, that the woman would say she needs help? It reminds me of about a year ago, this Rex Hudler. He's a sports announcer.
Yes.
Got caught. You read this story? He got caught. He had a little pot in his bag, and they nabbed him at the airport. Here's what his friend said. Jose Mota, a member of the radio team. Rex is a good friend. I pray for him and his family.
Oh.
We'll just take it as it comes. Play-by-play announcer Steve Foziak said, I gave him my support, and I told him I loved him. Because he had pot in his bag? She needs help because what is with this country? It's got to be stupider than when you started.
Well, yeah, when I mentioned the freak show, there are some of us who become the freaks. There are some who sit in the front row and get to critique the show. Some want to fix the freaks. There are ones who try to fix the freaks. These are the these are the different people like we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the liberals are just as bad on this issue as the conservatives because
Worse.
of politically correct speech.
Campuses.
Campus codes are nothing but sheer denial of free speech.
Exactly.
And their hands are not clean. And I'm glad this happened. So to expose them.
Right.
I don't want anything bad to happen to her, but she'll be fine. She'll bounce high.
Well, she needs help. She needs a good lawyer. I mean, why wasn't the engineer fired who didn't bleep when she
Yes,
asked
of
him to
course.
bleep? I mean, why is she the one? She had no intention.
And the other woman who lost her show this week, and I didn't understand it, was Martha Stewart. Because CBS pulled the Martha Stewart living shows, and even if she is a perjurer, does it somehow mitigate her ability to glue pine cones to picture frames? I mean, are the muffins any less delicious because she lied? And listen to this. This is Fred Upton of Michigan. After the FCC passed the higher fines bill, he said, it's imperative that we get this bill to the president's desk as fast as we can.
God damn it.
Code Orange.
It's utterly incomprehensible to me that a parent who, for example, lets her daughter run around with her butt crack showing and who lets their children listen to hip-hop music with very colorful and let's call it authentic language somehow gets upset to hear the word fuck uttered around her child. That makes no sense whatsoever.
I have a point I want to make about this. It takes me back to the religion thing. Religion is at the base of this one, too.
Yep.
The fear of, let me make the point. For a long time, all religions, I guess, but especially this Christian nation, Christianity has filled us with fear, shame, and guilt about the human body. Mm-hmm. It's evil, it's dirty, and the sex act and the parts of the body engaged in the sex act. And this has happened for so long, it is now practically, I think, genetic in us, that there is this fear. And when you add that overlay to business interests. Now, granted, NPR is a slightly different case, but generally speaking, these things happen because people at the cash register are afraid of offending a potential customer. These things generally have not happened free of commercial, and radio and television are nothing more than advertising media.
That's why I got fired.
Yeah, they're advertising media.
No.
That's all they
are.
are.
The ratings didn't go down on my old show. The advertisers pulled out.
Of
that
course.
was what
That's
it
all
was.
it ever is. I'm sorry, I'm taking up
And
all
the
this
people
time.
who complain are disproportionately people who are relatively advanced in years, but those people have a lot of votes. And so a small portion of the population ends up creating this kind of theatrical sense of what's appropriate and not appropriate on the air.
Well,
mine was like 30 years.
Just as
I would just say that if you never encounter anything in your community that offends you, you're not living in a free society.
right.
You know?
Yeah. Americans got this idea that they live in this bubble, and that at any time they're disturbed in their cocoon, it is time for someone to be fired,
Yes.
or it's
Sued.
something. Just to show you how things have changed, when you were arrested for the 7 words you can't say,
Yes.
this is almost over 30 years ago, those words were booby, tinkle, darn, number 2,
Yeah.
derriere, dangler, and cocksucking whore. I think it's interesting.
That's a point. If there's a chance to make, if there's a chance to make a point about those words,
Yes,
we
please.
should piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. And one word. What's interesting to me is that in these newspapers you will see F blank blank K.
Right.
That's a small example. You hear fuck, you hear on television or something.
Every 2 seconds you hear it.
You are allowed to know the word that was intended, yet you cannot see the 2 letters in the middle of it. What is that about? Because the idea has been conveyed. If the idea is evil, then it's been conveyed
Right.
anyway. So what are we doing here? I mean, that's the absurd level to which it goes.
It was better in the old days when they used to put ands and asterisks and stars and things. And then you could imagine really terrible things.
In
when
the
they
comic strips, a good old-fashioned curse.
Yeah, you could really imagine. the worst
I know that you were in this club for Madrid, and obviously what happened in Madrid is just beyond
scary,
awful,
yes,
and it's
yeah.
truly their 9/11. And it'll be interesting to see how Spain reacts to it, because obviously the way we reacted to 9/11 was controversial around the world. Norman Mailer said, America has an almost obscene infatuation with itself. And by that I think he meant that we take ourselves and what happens to us as more serious than when it happens to somebody else.
In other words, we're normal. The United States has done a lot of terrible things, and I think all thinking people are aware of that. And so we don't want to step into chauvinism, but it's natural for people and countries to have a certain self-regard. Just the other day, I was reading about a Native American group called the Uchis, and their language happens to have a grammar where the Uchis are different from everybody else. And the writer was talking about how wonderful and fascinating and cosmic and self-regarding that is. Well, all people do that, including big, evil United States. We don't want to overdo it, but I don't think that what you just mentioned is a sign of our being preening and puffed up and self-obsessed. It's inevitable. We remain human.
Well, do you think every country would make a memorial the way we're making the memorial?
Frankly, yeah. I mean, it's
What, you think it's
funny.
obscene
It's
or-
funny. But the memorial, there is an unhealthy fascination with death and remembering the dead. And no one can die now without teddy bears being left at a fence.
Right.
No one can die. Teddy bears, ribbons, candles, poems, greeting cards. You can't do it. And then they build a memorial. And then we're going to, someday, you know, they're going to have a big building called the Dead People's Building. Shape it like a gravestone, and just it counts for everything that happens, and we don't have to be doing all this stuff one by one for each thing that occurs. You know what? Let me say this. I have one figure with me. In the last century, in the 20th century, counting military deaths, both civilian and soldiers, and counting civilian deaths sponsored by government activity, we sacrificed 196 million people in this world. 196 million people, and for us to worry about 3,000 or 100 here or 500 there, I mean, if you have grief, fine, good insight. Same with religion. Keep it inside, keep it to yourself. You want to share it a little bit with friends and family, fine. But don't be coming and taking over things that are kind of public and thrusting your grief on me. You know, that's how I feel about it.
I got to get to new rules. Before I do, every week I read something to the president, because the president proudly says he does not read the paper. Mr. President, I don't know if you saw this, but your brother got married this week. It was in the paper. You weren't there. All right. It is time for this week's new rules.